we transition into our next session, the art of influencing, setting the stage for future leadership success. I am so excited to introduce you to our host and panelists for this session. Please join me in welcoming Julia Lustig, Head of Sales Engineering SEMEA at Seismic, Katie Sedgwick, Strategic Growth Advisor, Daniel Kish, VP of Product Marketing at Conveyor, and Sean Coleman, Field CTO at Riverbed Technologies. All right, I'm going to pass it over to you, Julia.
Hi, and welcome to everybody on this call. I am very excited, much like all this incredible set of panelists here with me, whom I'm delighted to share an intense and educational hour with. So if you haven't invited your friends or colleagues yet to join, you can still do that now, so they can benefit from this session or also the next sessions, of course, on the PreSales Collective. So, okay. If everybody is settled in, we can get started. So we're going to talk about the art of influence and how that matters when aspiring to lead in any shape or form. So just as a little intro, do you remember the moments when you meet a speaker at a big tech event and you have an enlightening chat? Or you get off an internal call at work or a webinar such as this one, and you think to yourself, wow, that leader is incredible, but you can't always pinpoint why that's the case. What skills and insights do they have that lead them to success? Do you wonder if leadership is for you? These are some of the topics that we're going to cover today. So if you have any questions along the way, there is, of course, the chat box, so you can ask these questions and we can take those on near the end of the session. All right. So with that, the introduction to this, the first question. How to everybody on here, please feel free to also explain who you are after or for this first answer of this first question. How do you build influence before taking on the authority of leadership? And I'm going to pass that on to Daniel first.
Okay, thank you, Julia, and welcome everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Daniel Kish. I run product marketing here at Conveyor. I'm also an ex-solutions consultant and sales engineer myself. And so this topic is very important for me as I've thought about my own leadership journey. And one thing that I think about when it comes to leading and building influence is, as a leader, you are simply put a change agent. You are responsible for driving change in an organization. And that doesn't necessarily always mean that you have to be formally tapped to go do that yourself. And so I think one of the very best ways that you can start demonstrating your aptitude as a leader, getting comfortable with what leadership looks like on a practical and tactical level, is to go find a problem and then take on ownership and go fix it. And so I think that as people think about how you build influence and how you get your name out there, a really clear and obvious opportunity is to solve a problem, identify that problem, then solve that problem, and then demonstrate that you are capable of bringing in others to go do it with you. That's leadership, I think, in a nutshell. And I think I get to pass this on over to Katie.
Thanks so much, Daniel. So hi, everyone. Katie Sedgwick. I've spent 20 years in pre-sales, most recently as a leader of pre-sales at SAP, and now really opening up my next chapter around helping pre-sales grow individually and with organizations. You know, when I think about first taking on leadership and building that influence with it, a great way to do that is through raising your hand with special projects, you know, as Daniel mentioned, with different initiatives that you care about, and being a project leader as a way to build that brand. And then secondly, we're in sales opportunities. That's a great place to, you know, take on leadership, not just for the demo, but becoming a partner with the account executives and the customer support teams that we're working with to really build a complete customer experience. And you know, we called it a solution captain when I was at SAP, but really being that right hand to the sales team not only demonstrates leadership and many of the abilities like providing feedback and coaching and the organization required, but also builds a brand with your very needed counterparts in the sales organization as someone who can lead and deliver results and success, which can then be an advocate as you want to formally step into that yourself. And now I'll pass this over to Sean.
Hi, thanks everybody. Appreciate the time here. Sean Coleman at Riverbed. I'm currently field CTO, spent many years in SE leadership. I agree with both Daniel and Katie. One of the things when I think about demonstrating influence is applying sort of strategic thought to deals, showing being capable of knowing the big picture, partnering, as Katie mentioned, with your sales counterparts. And one of the practical ways that I've done that in my past is to take a look at deals and instead of immediately offering a price cut, maybe adding some value with additional products or potentially adding some pre-sale support to it to craft different solutions, but showing that you're thinking about the bigger picture. And it strengthens your brand. It allows you to show that you actually have the capabilities to lead. So that's sort of the things that I think about when applying influence.
Yeah, and I love your answer, Sean. I completely agree with you in this what you mentioned with the seeing the bigger picture or becoming more strategic, like in your approach in everything that you do. So whether that's team calls, like deal reviews, any of that sorts, having a voice and an impact in everything that you do, really. And also bringing value into everything that you say, whether that's in any type of call, really, or the ideas that you bring to the table with the solutions, not just the problems, but having these solutions also in mind. I would say being in touch with all of the different parts of the business seems, it seems like a normal thing to do, but I think and I'm speaking more in pre-sales, is really making sure to understand where are the missing parts or the gaps, and helping out anyone that really needs any help. So that you're invaluable and you're memorable to them and to the whole company. So okay, let's break this down into the differences between influencing and persuasion, which has a little bit of a nuance there. So maybe I'll ask Sean first this time. Sean, what do you see as the difference between influence versus persuasion? And when would you apply each of those?
Yeah, so the current role that I'm in as field CTO is it's an individual contributor position. So while I used to have a staff of SE managers and SEs, I currently don't. So now I'm in a position where I have to exert influence without authority, and that requires the ability to understand people's motivations, to generate brand within the organization, so that you can persuade people when you need to make them do something that maybe they haven't thought about originally. And I think that comes with being fair, being reasonable, being seen as somebody who has integrity in what they're doing. Because knowing what motivates people allows you to craft your messaging so that you can start to persuade them when perhaps you're not in the room.
Yeah, I love that. I'll pass it maybe to Daniel for also an answer on this. What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, and I love the word integrity, right? Because my answer was going to be very similar to Sean's in the sense of influence is what happens when you are not in the room, persuasion what happens when you are in the room. And when you're not in the room and you are left to let your words that live on behind you kind of resonate, how that happens is usually if you are a high integrity person, if you are somebody who has ideas that others adopt, and then you also can bring those ideas into like a philosophy that others want to believe in. And so when I think about philosophy and integrity, I'm always thinking about like with my team, like what are we influencing outside of our org in the business? And the way that we start with that is we're very clear about like what we believe in, right? Like we are, to say words like we're customer obsessed is like kind of a trope, but if you say that all the time, well, then when you go back to the first principle, when you've got a tiebreaker between being customer obsessed or being like maybe a little bit internally obsessed on the easy thing or the right thing, you know the right thing to do. And I think that influence really stems from like having that principle and that philosophy and letting it guide you when you're not in that room. When you are in the room, it's more important to come in with all of those same ideas, but then augment it with good data, a good story, and good judgment. And that I think is like the recipe to being persuasive in a room, If I come in with data, I can always revert back to the evidence and the facts. If I've got a good story that matches all of that data together, well, now I can start to be a little bit more persuasive. And if I demonstrate good judgment in the process, well, now I can say, hey, we're like all reasonable people moving in a very specific direction. How does that align with our strategy and our tactics? And so I think that that's kind of like the secret sauce. And it sounds easy to do in theory, very hard to do and get right in practice.
I love that. Basing yourself on data, that's, I mean, it's a given, but like you said, data speaks for itself, right? So let me pass it on to Katie for the next question. Katie, what are the ways that you craft direct versus indirect influence? And how do you identify the right times to each approach?
Yeah. So first off, I think in pre-sales, some of the skills that we have that really apply here are knowing your audience, knowing your goals and your time frame, and crafting great questions. So is it an internal or an external audience? Am I in the room or is someone else delivering the message? Asking yourself those kinds of questions as we're thinking about putting our questions together. And then I really have always said through my career, I believe people cannot argue with their own conclusions. So I can, show you the data and say, this is what we have to do. We can't pursue this deal. It's already a lost cause. But if I can ask questions and ask really great questions that helps everyone else maybe articulate what I can see, but I want to, persuade them to get to, we all come to a much better place. And so really lean into the power of questions that we know that you are already great with your customers, and bring that to how you are connecting with your teams. And you're looking to exercise this, because as you start to exercise that voice, you become a voice that's heard.
Wow. Yeah, the question part here is, I think, also really, really important. Asking questions, but also asking the right questions. Oftentimes, I feel like we are asking questions because we feel like we need to be, saying something but when they're not the right ones, sometimes it can, it doesn't help anyone. It's just a space that's getting filled, right? So yeah, totally agree with you on that. Okay, how about the next question that I have for you, Daniel? How do you navigate challenges when leading cross-functional initiatives, teams, without formal authority? Which is very similar.
I love this one because I think about it a lot, and I've definitely made some mistakes here, but I've also got a piece of very practical advice that I've learned over the years, I think can help a lot of folks who might be experimenting with leadership or thinking about their careers. And it is a very simple piece of advice, which is find out what everybody else's job is and understand how to make them better at it. And I'll give you an example. So when I first started off in consulting and in solutions consulting, I was very, very narrowly defined. I was like, what do I need to do great discovery, to move from discovery into a great demo, to move from a great demo into, a great, sale, and all of the things that kind of come along with that? How do I get domain expertise? But sooner or later, I started to realize, well, what made me better was actually getting information from other people. Like I needed information from technical support. I needed information from marketing. I needed to be trained from enablement. And understanding what their jobs were on a daily basis, like what did they care about? How did they do better? Actually helped me get more information from them and in turn grow myself. And I think when I then pivot that into a leadership context, the more you understand how the company operates, how you understand other people's roles, the more of a superpower it is to help get leverage. And as a leader, you are constantly seeking out leverage. And one thing that you can do with leverage is understand, is somebody doing a great job and maybe they are under-recognized, and I can pull them into my orbit. I can drive more benefit with them and align myself with them. Or is somebody not giving me what I need and I need to help them, I can coach them. And just because they don't sit in my function doesn't mean that I want to ignore that. Same team, same company, we want to grow that business. And so I think that the more you understand how your company operates, you get really dangerous on a lot of different dimensions. It makes you better, but it also obviously makes the company better.
Yeah. Sean, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, when I think about what Daniel was talking about, I agree 100%. It's all about influence. It's all about understanding motivations. Making people's jobs easier is a key way to step up into a leadership role. But the key part of that, I think, is just understanding what makes people tick, right? So what are they focused on? And this is, a natural skill that we have in pre-sales, I think, because we're constantly asking those questions of what our customers are looking for. So I think coupling that with some of the other things that we've talked about this morning around data-driven decisions, the ability to be able to prove out, your position based on actual facts is a key requisite to being able to influence and persuade people. But the more important part of that is just understanding people, and that is what we do as SEs, right? I mean, I think I always look at the two words in the title, sales engineering. Right. The first word is sales, and that means influencing and persuading people. And then the second part of it is where we get to apply our technical abilities and actually craft solutions. But it comes down to being able to motivate. It comes down to being able to understand what makes people tick, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think if you look at how you're, executing everything of what Daniel and Sean have shared here, something really important that's a great exercise that I would encourage you to do is to be really clear on your brand of who are you and how are you known. And I describe that as simply as if someone was to introduce you as an elevator pitch, have you met Sean? What would they say about you? For me as a leader, I always wanted that to be that my job is to make it easier for you to be successful. If you think about building influence, especially with people that you haven't worked with, having a brand that precedes you and being introduced with that really helps pave the way with that.
I also love that because, and I'll build one more thing, is like, people are always like, we hear this advice sometimes, and it's great advice. It's like, build a brand and demonstrate that you are a thing. And then a lot of people are stuck with like, well, how the hell do I build a brand? Like, who am I? What do I do? And I think like the easiest thing is to pick one thing, something that you love, that you're passionate about. You're like, I want to be known as the guy or gal for this. Like when this kind of thing comes up, I love it. I talk about it. I Slack about it. I make it known. I write. I read. I am an expert. And like when you do that one time, you can compound that the next time and the next time. And you get to be a brand one day, but it starts with one action. So like if people are looking for a practical way to do that, like start with one thing you're interested in and keep doing it until something happens.
It's very true, Daniel. I think, it goes back to some of the earlier comments that we had around getting creative and thinking outside of the box and showing some strategic thinking, the ability to demonstrate that in practical ways, either by doing something, that's unique to your product set or whatever it might be, really kind of demonstrates your ability as a person to go beyond the boundaries of what, the job description might be and actually start to help people. And it goes back to, integrity. It goes back to trust and being fair and reasonable. But certainly that's a great way to start. Excellent advice.
Yeah. I mean, all of your answers were really, really, really insightful. I think what I would say as well is making sure that the initiatives that you have is also a team goal. I always say, 1 + 1 = 3. And so everybody has something to gain from. It's not just for yourself. Of course, that ties in with your brand, but it also means that you're identifying, much like in a deal, the challenges of each team and what the blockers and how they each of these people need to solve for these blockers are in order to, and when you're going to help them, actually that helps you also build your brand indirectly, right? So I think building a brand is also really important to do, outside of the business, but also inside of the business and where you're working at. It's not enough, I think, to just say you're building a brand internally and you're making sure that, what you're bringing is value to every single person that you're working with, whether that's on a deal or, like I said, in a team, but also being able to build a brand outside of work and on LinkedIn or any other channels, because, guess what? When you leave a company and you go somewhere else, you're going to have to build again from scratch. So if something is already there and it's external and it helps you get maybe that next job, then of course, that helps you a lot. But yeah, I think it's great. All right. For another question, so I'm going to ask you, Katie, how have you applied influence to navigate a professional situation you didn't agree with as a leader? And why, what was this an important tool for you, and what were the outcomes?
All right, so 2 years ago, our company did a reorganization and we inherited a job that was not typically pre-sales. And one of the great things about pre-sales is you can touch and do a lot of things, but then sometimes it can be a little bit diluted from our main focus and our main passion of really connecting with customers. So we were inheriting a concept around demand generation, which we didn't know, and it didn't really make sense. So the first thing I did was ask a lot of questions. I didn't want to, I had my own opinions. I didn't agree with it, but I, knew that this was the organization that we were path that we were heading down. So I asked a lot of questions and I connected with people who were experts on this to learn from them. And through that, I actually found myself influenced and started to see ways that this could be a good learning opportunity. And while we normally get involved at a different stage in the sales cycle, this could be a great opportunity for us to connect with customers earlier and to share great ideas of ways that we think we could be more effective. So I found myself influenced by asking questions when I didn't agree. But then I'm a leader and I have to sell my team on this, and they all are not excited about this. They all view this as they're just taking on somebody else's job and nothing's coming off of their plate. So this meant, really bringing energy and excitement to this. This meant really, helping us talk through ways that this already correlated with what we did. So it wasn't this huge, big change, but it was some incremental things that were actually really giving us the license to do a lot of things that we wanted to do and we just never had a voice to do. It meant, finding ways that we could tie this with development and growth initiatives for people who are more excited about this. And it became something that we were able to really drive a lot of success with. But I'll be the first to admit I started where I was not persuaded to it and really had my own journey myself, which I think is important as a leader, to not just jump in believing the right answer, but being open to new perspectives and being influenced yourself.
That's a great story, Katie. I love the part about trying to find creative ways to take that to an unexcited team. Your ability to break it down and look at where the positives are is really critical in terms of what we have to do in terms of influencing as leaders when we encounter decisions that that maybe we don't agree with 100%.
Yeah.
I also love that because it speaks to an idea I've heard on podcasts all the time now. If anybody listens to Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, he talks a lot about having a flexible identity. And this concept of, I think one way, my job title looks like this. It gets really attractive for a long period of time. You get good at something. You have a lot of domain expertise, and it's hard to disrupt your pattern. It's hard to change your identity in some ways. And what I like about that story is that, first of all, it's really hard to sell people on something which is like, hey, I'm going to dump a bunch of stuff on your plate. I need you to have a flexible identity. But it's another to offer it up as an opportunity, which is like, we're going to learn and grow. We might in a year look back and say it was a horrible failure, but at least we did something meaningful and we learned from it. And I kind of like that because it's not always, sometimes you don't agree with the decision, but you got to find a way to make the best of it. But the truth is, like, the more that you start with that principle of a flexible identity, it makes it a little bit easier as you grow into a leadership role, and also as you appreciate all the leaders who are trying to help you grow your own career as well.
Well, and Daniel, that growth perspective is so critical. The person I was on day one as a leader became completely different a year later to 3 and 5 years later. Really being open to growth and being intentional about that as a leader is so, so critical.
Yeah. So I think also one of the things as a leader is, always ask questions, like it's been said before, but also I think it's in at least for me, it's making sure you plant that seed if you have these good ideas, obviously, and you plant these seeds and let the people that you're leading come up with that idea themselves, which is, of course, the hardest thing to do, right? But I think also another thing that I've thought about is elevating the just the standards that is required from my team, which is not always easy because, you know, and specifically on important deals, but it's not always easy to push your team to do something that they're maybe weren't used to doing before. So that's why I'm talking about planting that seed, making sure that you also show an example of what great looks like. But as also you mentioned very well, Daniel, that doesn't always mean you are right. So being able to be flexible and try to find ways to coach, but also I think what's great, and it's a tool that we're using internally, for example, is finding out the best examples of people in my team and then using that as well. So yeah. All right. For another question here, do you balance your time between leading a team and maintaining your own technical expertise in pre-sales? I think that's a really tough one. So Daniel, are you up for the challenge?
I'm up for it. Although I will say I've shifted so much over the years with this. So now I lead a very small team, and I get to still be technical and hands-on in a lot of ways. So I'm a chemical engineer by training way back in the day. And so I still love like engineering and all of that side of the world. And the best way that I have found to maintain a really close relationship with it as my career trajectory has shifted is reading and writing. It's so simple, right? The more you read and the more you write about the things that you read, the more you kind of lock a lot of information back in memory. And as you continue to get slightly further away from the ground truth, like my view as a leader and what was always hammered into my head from great leaders was the field is the only thing that matters. How do I make their job better? How do I get them doing exactly what they need to with the minimal amount of messing up from kind of the middle management and executive layers? And I think one way that you stay close to that is always being sharp on what's changing, what's happening in everybody's world. And, you know, you get that through interviewing, of course, but reading and writing is just like, it's still such a powerful mechanism. And so I would say when I am always thinking about how is the world shifting, yes, I'm asking questions of people and I'm constantly interviewing folks on my team, like, what are you doing? What are you trying? I'm doing that myself too, but I'm also reading and I'm writing about it. It's turning the thoughts into an idea. And so I think it doesn't matter where you end up. Like some of the greatest CEOs and, you know, leaders down to people who are still just in the weeds every day are writing. And it's such a superpower. I couldn't encourage it even more.
Well, Daniel, and that's a multiplier behavior right there, of because what you're doing can become an educational tool to share with your team.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, you know, all of us are challenged, especially these days with the way the technology is moving so quickly. I mean, you just think back a couple of years ago and we talk about the concept of artificial intelligence. Like, what is that exactly, right? The only way to understand what it is to actually get into the weeds and do some reading on it. You know, there's been machine learning for a long time, but AI as a concept, everybody's talking about it. You know, it's a boardroom conversation right now. And I think it reflects the way that as leaders you do still have to maintain a pulse on the technical part of it. You know, whether that's by participating with your teams in calls, in customer calls, but I think it's really critical to understand at least maybe not as a deep a level as you used to as an individual contributor, but certainly being able to discuss down to a certain level with engineers, with the people that you're interacting with from a customer perspective is critical because it enforces credibility for you and your organization.
Well, and I think when I've seen people on the spectrum, I find that sometimes there's the polar sides. We're in pre-sales because we love to connect with customers. We love to be in the product. And it can be easy and it can be safe there to continue to stay in that world. But especially as you take on leadership, sometimes that can almost steamroll your team and deflate confidence that you don't trust them or you're micromanaging and you're in the weeds with them. So I think an important thing to remember is where are there opportunities to empower my team and trust my team, help in the preparation, but be having my vision of how is it easier for them to be successful. And that might mean some other boulders and things that I need to be moving and kind of operating like a bouncer to make it easier to pave the way for them. One of the best things that I was told when I first took on leadership was you need to make your priorities manage the people, and manage the business. And that meant that I needed to have a different eye on some of the things. I still kept a functional connection with what we were doing with the roadmap and how we were connecting with customers, but I had to develop a sales acumen around really understanding that process so I could be influencing there to make it easier for us to show up with our customers and do our jobs as pre-sales.
Yeah, that part of it, Katie, is really important. The ability to connect with our sales counterparts by participating on forecast calls, providing input into deal reviews, those types of things. And it does somewhat require, intimate knowledge of the technology and the product set as well. So there's a balance that you have to strike there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I also like the idea of balance because I think some people, you initially start looking at leadership and you say, oh, well, that must mean I must only go to the big picture. I got to get all the way up at the high level, and I'm always going to be kind of like up in the stratosphere thinking about the business. And honestly, it's not true, right? Like the hallmark I keep finding of really good leaders are the ones who can get super high out of the weeds. They can zoom back into the weeds. They can get really deep. They can be there for as long as they need to. And then as soon as it becomes obvious that, hey, maybe we're in the weeds a little bit too long, they pull back out and they can go in and out and in and out and have the judgment to recognize when is the time to be in the weeds and when is the time not to be. That usually comes with more experience, I would say, but that's kind of the secret sauce of like, you got to do both. When you do it matters and how you do it matters.
Goes back to your flexible identity comment, Daniel, I think, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And I'll second the forecast calls as well. I think we have a say in them. Where I currently work at, we make sure that pre-sales is part of has a voice, and we give sentiments scorings to each and every single deal. So I think indeed, like being on the field as well, and not everywhere, but really on the important stuff that matters. Is also making sure that you understand critically who you're talking to, what your business is like. The field basically gives you all of the insights that you need to feed back into product and to feedback also into pre-sale sentiment, right? So, and making sure that, it is a viable opportunity or not, and have that, have the pre-sales also give their peace of mind and challenge a little bit the sellers, a healthy challenge. Okay, and going into another question. So what skills or experiences do you believe are often overlooked but essential for thriving as a pre-sales leader? I'll ask Sean first.
Yeah, thanks. This is a great question because it really speaks to like the gaps that you have in terms of like what skills you're looking for and how do you make that transition. When I moved into leadership first, one of the things that I immediately recognized was that it's really important from an authenticity perspective to be able to admit your mistakes, right? We're all human, right? We all make mistakes, and some are going to be bigger than others. But I think owning up to them and owning them immediately is one of the things that's hard to do because nobody wants to make mistakes. But I think it's really, really important. Coupling that with the timing of information release. Right? The ability to know when to say what is really, really critical. And that's not just in leadership. I think that applies in life in general, actually. But I made some mistakes in terms of releasing information too quickly. It got out. It was something that I had to, call my boss on. It wasn't a comfortable conversation at all. But immediately I had to do it. And I think that as a skill is something that as an individual contributor, you can learn. And it shows that you have integrity, you have authenticity, and you're willing to, to put yourself aside so that you can, further the betterment of the organization.
I think as you step into leadership, it's easy to want to just drive some quick results and some quick wins and really prove yourself. And the last 2 times I stepped into leadership, I was very intentional to take time with it, to have conversations with everyone that I was meeting with and the other stakeholders to really understand the dynamics of the team. Well, when I first took over my last position, our series of team calls, the first thing I did is I reserved the first 15 minutes for all of the org updates and the things that I needed to convey as a leader. And I let the team raise their hand to take ownership for the calls. And we did that for about the first 4 or 5 months. And it was a way for us to start to curate a culture together versus me just coming in and speaking with what I wanted to do. And I think that intentionality to listen and understand who your team is and what they need, and then build that culture together can be a really critical thing to help bring together the cohesiveness of the team that can then grow and accelerate faster, because it's something that everybody's really bought in on together.
Those were like two phenomenal pieces of advice. I hope people like lock them in their in their brain somewhere. And what's interesting is a lot of it is very similar to Robert Greene. He has the 7 immutable laws of power. And, you know, one of them looks similar to what Sean said, which is that vulnerability is a superpower. And another one looked a lot like what Katie said, which is like when you allow space in a vacuum, you actually kind of like create a lot more than what happens when you like step in. And I feel very similarly to both of those. The third one that I would add there is when I think about like a skill that's overlooked, we get really good at saying yes and no. And we often get really bad at figuring out, is my ratio of yes and no in my current job the right ratio at my next job? And what I mean by that is sometimes we're saying no often because we're like, well, I need to protect my time, right? Like leadership told me to protect my time. I got to say no to a bunch of things. We're saying yes too often, right? Like customers are saying something, we got to get the deal done. Just say yes. The product team will throw it over the fence. It'll be somebody else's job. And that balance, I think, of knowing when to say no and when to say yes, when to have a lot of energy and when to have a lot of patience, is a completely underappreciated skill. And you don't go to school for this. You only learn it through a lot of trial and error, mostly error. But that the more you can start to experiment with, my natural position in my current role feels like I'm doing a lot of yes, or I'm doing a lot of no. Starting to experiment with like, maybe I should be saying yes a little bit more often, or maybe I need to pump the brakes a little bit more often, is a really useful way of figuring out how to exert that power and influence, like we talked about earlier, but also how to, you know, navigate to the next stage of your leadership journey.
Yeah, so many insights. I love the vulnerability part as well. Just saying it as it is, always staying professional, of course, but when, you know, admitting when you did something that you see wasn't right and fixing it or trying to find ways to grow from it, I think is just essential. I feel like usually sales engineers have that kind of skill. They just need to really develop it a lot more when you go into leadership. Okay. So we're going to move on to the questions that we have here in the Q&A box. So thank you so much for these questions. I'm going to start with the first one here. How do you measure the effectiveness of your influence? Thanks, Mary Rose, for this question. Maybe I'll pass it on to you, Katie.
You know, I think one of the places to start is, was this a short-term type of goal, or is this something longer term that I'm trying to do? Am I trying to influence, you know, the amount of time that we're preparing and we're putting into our customer presentations to try to get to a better maybe balance, because we're too in the weeds and we're too in depth and we need to kind of elevate what we're doing? Or am I trying to, you know, not pursue this type of deal anymore? Like, understanding where that goal is helps you assess where you're effective. And then I think in listening and hearing the feedback, you know, what are people saying as an outcome of the work that we're doing? Is it affirming the path that you want to go? Are you seeing more objections arise? You know, those types of things can help you assess where you're being successful and where you need to spend more time or adapt a different strategy.
Yeah, I think there's two elements to that as well, Katie. There's sort of the short-term and the long-term goals, right? There's you know, am I actually influencing some decisions that are sort of smaller and more near term? And is that having an influence on some of the longer term objectives that I'm trying to push towards, right? So there's a couple of different ways to measure that. There's, you know, sort of the incremental decisions that you see are being made, and then there's the overall strategic decisions that perhaps you're influencing from a larger perspective.
I'll take a slightly different 2x2 than what you just heard, and I'll take internal and external influence. So when I think about measuring internal influence, I look for flags that there are people and advocates in my corner when it comes time for like promotions and things like that. Like, do you have a ready list of people who you work with closely who you trust, who you would say in a pinch, oh, that person will go to bat for me, right? Like those are some pretty simple flags that if you're thinking about, like, we all used to do 360-degree reviews. You got to put all these people on there. It's like, how many of those people that you put on there do you deeply trust to like say great things about you when you're not in the room? That's like one measure. On the external side, it's kind of the same idea, but it's like, I need to multi-thread to get to the CRO. How many people do I trust to help open up doors for me at the customer? Am I doing the right levels of activity? Am I building relationships such that they view me as a partner, not as somebody who's just asking them for information all the time? And that's usually a good measure of like the bartering technique of like, every time I'm asking for something, am I delivering something too? If I'm trying to constantly get information out of you, am I giving you something back in return? And so these are good ways that you can measure and monitor your influence, both internally and externally.
Love that, multi-threading, not just in deals. All right, so a next question here is from Harsh Agarwal. Thanks, Harsh, for your question. So your question is, being a leader, do you miss the kick of being an IC and high of closing? That is a great question. Sean, do you want to take that?
Closing is closing. We all love the deals. I mean, I know that, there's definitely more reward associated with knowing that you were the technical influencer on a deal, on a multi-million-dollar deal, potentially that gets closed. But at the end of the day, the deal gets closed, everybody gets to celebrate. I think as a leader, there's a special sort of reward that you get from knowing that you were able to have that team member actually make that happen. So there's, potentially there was some things that you were able to influence in that person's career along the way that put them in a position of potentially being, part of a majors team or working bigger deals or more complex deals or, more strategic deals for the company. So I think it's two-sided really, in terms of the highs and the rewards that you get from, from a deal being closed.
Well, and you're right. There's a celebration and success of, especially as a leader, likely you're bringing together that team. That's going to be that win. You're providing lots of feedback or coaching or directions with that. So you still have a hand in what's happening. Lots of times my job became participating in dry runs and giving feedback around the strategy that was going to be executed and still influencing there. But I also found as a leader, different ways to connect with customers to not lose that. So I might not be the one clicking the keys and doing the demo. I might be giving more of a roadmap strategy presentation. I took on a lot of executive sponsorship where I'm having conversations at an executive level and getting that feedback that's going to be able to be helpful for the team, or I'm speaking at conferences. So, it doesn't mean to take on leadership that you're going to stop connecting with customers. But I do think you have to be intentional about finding the right ways to do that. That's going to feed that excitement that you need yourself, but also add value to the team and the organization at a more strategic and higher level.
Yeah, I'll bust the myth right now. If anybody thinks that you're going to stop selling at some point, that's not the case. I mean, let's pick every CEO of the top 100 Fortune 500. They're all still selling. So I don't think the rush ever goes away. I think the stakes go up. And that's what's actually more exciting is like you get to do it with a team. You have less control. The numbers get bigger. And so I think the rush is there and more. And also, like with what Katie and Sean said, I mean, like when you get to watch other people kind of like do it for themselves, you're teaching them. It's kind of like if anybody has kids, I have kids. Like watching them do something for themselves for the first time is like so empowering. And that never goes away. That rush is equally as exciting as any other rush on an individual accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think a win for yourself when you're on a deal and you close it is, of course, incredible. But when you're also a leader and any little win that you're making in terms of when you see someone in your, like you said, like if it's your kid, a deal is a deal. And if it's won by someone in your team and you're specifically, I think when you're trying to make certain changes and you see that person make these changes in a deal, whether that's the storytelling or maybe it's the different products that they're trying to sell. When you see that happen and the deal is then closing for you, it's like as big of a win, if not more, because, you having full control over your deal and seeing it sign is amazing. But when you're managing people, That's the one thing you don't have is control. And that's why influence is also so important. You try to influence the best you can. You try to be a leader, and you hopefully see that. And when the wins come in, that's when that's when you're winning as well. So I think that's great. Okay. Another question from David. So David is asking, would love to understand how often you get deeply involved in opportunities. Do you demo and or present if the SE is involved? Daniel, you want to take that?
Yeah, so I mean, like, I was Conveyor, we're Series A, we're gonna be Series B at some point in the near future. We're, small team, sub 50. We'll soon, probably, double in size like everybody does. And I'm marketer number 3. And so I get every job. I get to pick up the phone call, and I get to call people. I get to, smile and dial. I get to do demos. I get to, like, every little part of the job. Now, at a small company, that's like kind of part of the job. When I was at Salesforce or BCG or, some bigger places, like, maybe you don't get to do that necessarily, but getting into the weeds still is so important to never lose that connection with the idea that you can do that. And so what I'll say to that is, like, it's so powerful to, like, always know that you can go do something, even if you don't have to go do it and you want to hire for it and you want to scale. But I think you've probably heard a variety of these opinions so far. It's like, don't lose that connection too much. That's where the magic is. And that's, if the field is going to do that, they need to know that you have earned the right to coach them because you've done it before and you understand how hard it is. And so when it goes wrong or when it goes well, you can support them in failure and in success.
Well, and something that I loved is, as a leader, I got brought into, it was a problem deal. We feel like it's already lost. It's not going our way. It's highly competitive or it's highly complex. And when you've been a great SC, those are the places that you love to get involved and you want to be involved more of. I have this weird motivation where if it's a problem and we feel like it's already lost, I get excited because the only place we can go is up. So how you're working might pivot, but I enjoyed that next challenge of getting to work where it's hard.
Yeah, I think the question speaks to, understanding what the dynamics are in an individual opportunity. So if you're in a situation where there's the potential for a leader to do a demo and that's appropriate, I think that's perfectly fine. I would say that my SEs would probably do a better job at demoing than I do. But it also goes back to that technical capability that we talked about earlier on, being able to understand making sure that you're aware of the technology. And then there's the situational component to it. Perhaps it's more of a strategic conversation or a strategic presentation that you got to give in order to persuade the customer that they do have a future with you and that they can become a partner with you. So it really depends on the situation, I think. But in terms of the original part of the question, do you get involved in deals? Absolutely. All the time on those larger opportunities that are more meaningful and more strategic for the organization.
All right. Amazing. And then someone asked as well in the chat whether this is recorded. Yes, it's recorded. This event is recorded, so you will be able to see it again. I know it was a great session. So we're coming to this closing of the session. So I don't know about you, but I'm feeling very energized after today's conversation. We've explored what it takes to lead without the title or with the title, build influence, drive change, and even when you're not in charge. There's one thing that did stick with me though. Leadership is also about action and not authority. It's, being there, being a solution captain, being able to be vulnerable. Influence happens also when you're not necessarily in the room, and you build trust and credibility as well. And so that when you speak, people will actually listen, not just hear you. So here's my little challenge. Go out and make some noise. Use these insights to make your mark. Hopefully you implement those as well. Whether you're a leader leading a team or just starting out, or you're an amazing IC, be bold, be memorable, and be the kind of leader that people want to follow. Thank you so much to our amazing panel. You were all amazing, and thanks for everybody for joining. Let's keep pushing the boundaries.